Welcome to the Tales of a Gearhead podcast. I'm your host, Stacey David. This podcast is brought to you by LMC Truck. Keep them on the road is their slogan, and they supply the parts to help you do that. Also, Cornwell Tools, the choice of professionals and hot rods and enthusiasts alike. If you want quality tools, Cornwell's the place to go. Let's get to it. You know, when it comes to kids' toys as you're growing up, there's always that one that is that Excalibur, you know, that unicorn that you can't ever get. And when it came to Hot Wheels, there was one car that eluded me more than any other car. It was called the TNT Bird.
When you buy the new Hot Wheels TNT Bird, beach bound and police cruiser, and if your set looks like this, you're then ready to go. Add a super track pack, a jump ramp pack, 2 curve packs, a daredevil loop pack, race them through the start and finish gate with the competition pack, and a supercharger, and you've got it all. Go with the winner.
I don't know what it was about that car. It was from the Spoiler series, so it didn't have a hood on it, had a stripe down it, and I had only ever seen one, and my friend Spencer Betterman had it. And it was red, and we'd go over there and we'd play with our Hot Wheels, and he had this one called the TNT Bird, and it had that stripe on it, and the motor was out there, and the side pipes on it, and I was like, I'll trade you everything I have for the TNT Bird. And it wasn't even the fastest car. It's just everybody loved the TNT Bird. And I don't know if it was part the name, you know, and the look, or if it was just the whole thing. Spencer would never trade the TNT Bird to me. So, and I never saw another one. I never saw anybody else that had one. Okay, so that was right in that 2 or 3 years when I was really into Hot Wheels. Okay, so now, fast forward, I grow up, I'm a teenager, you know, I'm getting into cars and all this kind of thing. I start thinking about the TNT Bird. And it's like, well, what exactly was the TNT Bird? Was it a T-Bird actually? Because a lot of times the Hot Wheels played on the name, or was it a Roadrunner? You know, was it a TNT Bird? You know, was it a Super Bird? So I started researching it and trying to find it, you know, years later, and found out that it was based on a 67, 68 Thunderbird, 2-door. When Hot Wheels reissued some of the original ones in the early 90s, I went back and I started not only digging the ones I had in boxes that I had played with and stuff, but I started picking up the ones that I always wanted. And one of the first ones that I had to get me a TNT Bird. And right now I've got 2 of them. I'm sitting here looking at them. I have to say, man, when I held that car, I was 6 years old again, man. It was the coolest thing. You know, the one I'm looking at right now feels just like the one that Spencer Betterman had. You know, it had wear and tear on it. You know, the sticker on the side, the number 7 was starting to come off, and it was really neat. And you know what the crazy thing is? That might be the old one that Spencer had. You know, who knows? That ended up at a yard sale, and it went around and ended up in a flea market that then ended up in a toy collector's collection, and who knows? It kind of makes me wonder who was the kid that actually had this one, and if they enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed the one that Spencer had. Or was it one that just ended up in the box that they didn't really care about? Because everybody had those kind of Hot Wheels. You had the ones you loved and you really played with. Then you had the junkers, man, that you stepped on. And you know, I've actually looked for 67, 68. That almost was the V8 Interceptor. That was my second choice of 67, 68 T-Bird. And one of the main reasons I didn't is that they're so much bigger. And there's no real aftermarket like they have for the Cougar. And the Cougar's a cooler car. You know, another aspect of the die-cast cars and the Hot Wheels and those kind of things is that people don't realize that it can lead you into building the actual vehicles, not just playing with them. For example, you know, the ones that were kind of a transition to me were the ones with the bodies that flipped up, like the Snake and Mongoose funny cars. I've got one here in my hands called Funny Money, which is a double engine armored car that once again is a Tom Daniel design. Those things, you know, when you open those up, you could see that engine and that chassis and that roll bar up under there, and it was just intriguing to me. So me, like most kids, ripped the bodies off of my original Snake and Mongoose like an idiot, because they're very collectible now. But it gave me an idea of what the chassis were and how a vehicle was put together. And so it is no coincidence that the first things that I really got into building were go-karts, which is basically just a little chassis. It taught me, you know, how to put together suspensions and drivetrains and motors and get out and have fun with something and not be worrying about bodies and interiors or anything like that when you're just learning. Those, you know, die-cast cars and the model kits were definitely that transition area where I felt like I could get out and solve problems and put something together. So don't underestimate the value of what a child is learning when you put a toy in their hands. And I know, listen, my parents, just like most parents, you know, I was pretty destructive with a lot of my toys. That's why it's pretty rare that I have any Hot Wheels left over. You know, especially young boys, we're rough on stuff. But just because we're rough on stuff doesn't mean that we don't appreciate it and that we're not learning something from it. I remember my dad used to come out and he goes, "Why did you just set all of your model kits on fire?" I had the best kid answer, "I don't know." I thought it would look cool. But I tell you what, I learned a lot about fire and what not to touch. But I also learned how to put the best authentic bullet holes into a model aircraft. And that is to take a pin and get it red hot and then just put those bullet holes. And you could take two pins side by side and you could do the double thing like it was a double machine gun. Oh yeah, it was awesome. And I know you're sitting there, please tell kids to not try this at home. Why? I did. Where else are you gonna do it? At school? Of course you try it at home. Preferably on your brother's model kits, not yours. I went through a phase in building model kits. I went into the airplane phase where, you know, I had to build these World War II airplanes and I had to make them authentic. And I would build them and I would look at them and I would run out of space on the walls or on the shelves. And so I'd take them out and destroy them and try to make them, you know, look authentic as they burned. That didn't go real well. I went through the model kits fairly quickly. You know, one question I get asked a lot is, what is a great first project for somebody? And my answer is always the same, an old truck. For several reasons. First of all, they're cheap, they're easier to find. It's okay if you drive them around all beat up. And there's great sources for parts from like LMC. They carry all kinds of stuff, whether you're doing a custom build, if you're doing an original build, if you're doing a full-on hot rod thing, you can find stuff in their catalog. So getting parts is not that hard. And they really support the truck life, which is, if you've never been into the truck world, as you start to dig into the truck life, you'll see that it's kind of represents Americana. So if you need parts, man, LMC is the place to go. It's kind of funny to look back on the vehicles, you know, as you're building them or as the ones that you've built. I haven't had these Hot Wheels out of the case for decades. And like I said, talking to Tom Daniel the other day, I started looking through some of his vehicles. It's crazy when you look at some of the stuff that might have been a subliminal influence on you, and you don't even realize it. You don't even see it until you kind of look at that. Well, I'm looking at this one there. This is my original Harry Hauler, and I got this way back. This one was always very competitive on the track because it was heavy. And it was some sort of a pickup with a flip front. I think it was Ira Guilford design. That is the only vehicle that I actually borrowed the name Harry Hauler when I built the Harry Hauler of my own. Obviously a totally different look, totally different animal. But that's the only one where I actually used a name that I was familiar with just because it was such a great name. And I always really liked it. I don't know if a lot of people remember the rise of Johnny Lightning.
The Johnny Lightning Challenge. The Johnny Lightning Challenge. The Johnny Lightning cars challenge all other cars, anywhere, anytime, any place. Race Johnny Lightning cars against any cars in the world and see for yourself. For speed, for looks, for skill, for excitement, get the challengers. Get cars, tracks alone or in sets by Johnny Lightning.
Johnny Lightning came out in 1970. Might have been 69, but I think 70 was it. And Johnny Lightning was sponsoring Al Unser, who won the Indy 500 in '70. And I mean, Johnny Lightning came along and they were a die-cast competitor to Hot Wheels. I remember they were a big deal. And I never liked them as well. Their designs seemed to be a little crazier, but man, they were fast. I have an original Johnny Lightning here that I got from a friend of mine's collection. It's a little 32 Roadster with an operating rumble seat. And to this day, this is probably the fastest, straightest rolling car on the table. I'd put it up against anything. You didn't want to get your Hot Wheels beat by Johnny Lightning. The races that we used to do, when you raced, you lost your car. You know, you went out and raced, and if it got really serious, it was kind of a pink slips kind of thing, that if you raced against somebody in the neighborhood, your car was on the block. And if your car got beat, then you lost that car. You made sure that you were playing for fun or if you're playing for cars, because all you needed was one fast car and you'd end up with a whole pile of cars. You know, the die-cast cars came out and they tried to make them motorized in every way possible. Of course, Sizzlers came out in the early 70s and that was a whole nother animal. That was basically a Hot Wheel with an electric motor in them. Those suckers would scream. Those were awesome. Then they had the Chop Cycles, which was the Sizzler, but they were motorcycles. But Johnny Lightning, I don't know if you guys remember, for like 1 year, they would hold compressed air. And they would go down a track and they would flip a little thing and they would have that blast of compressed air. They were kind of like jet powered. And that's how they pushed them. And I had one of those cars. Of course, you had to have the whole set to make it work right, to build the pressure in it. And I never knew anybody that, you know, they never worked right. So that kind of came and went. But yeah, trying to have the fastest die-cast car was a big deal. You know, one question I get a lot these days is, where do you go to find quality tools? And that's a legitimate question, because you used to be able to go down and buy them at the hardware store, but you can't anymore. But a great solution is somebody like Cornwell Tools. Not only are they America's oldest tool company, they've been in business 100 years, man, so they know what they're doing. It's the top level tools, but they also deliver right to your door. So all you have to do is get on their website, find out where a dealer is near you, and the guy will show up. You know, you can have him show up weekly, daily, monthly, whatever, and he will take care of your tool needs. So if you're looking for quality tools, the best in the business, check out Cornwell. You won't be disappointed. Hot Wheels, when they first started, they had certain designers. They had Larry Wood, and they had Ira Guilford, and of course they had Tom Daniel. Of course, Harry Bentley Bradley. These guys would come up with cars that were based off of real cars, or they were actual real show cars that were on the circuit at the time. There was the Silhouette, which was a Cushenberry car. There was the Python, which I think was a Cushenberry car as well. There was the Beatnik Bandit, which was Roth's car, which I understand Roth was never happy with the Beatnik Bandit because it was never done in white, which his original car was white with all of his crazy striping on it. Most of the Hot Wheels, when they first started, were based off of a real car and then a modified car. And then they started to do cars that didn't really exist, like the Split and Image or the Twin Mill, the Turbo Fire and Rockabye Baby and all those crazy things. At least at that point though, the cars made sense. I mean, I'm sitting here, I'm looking at the Twin Mill, and that car is designed in a way where it makes sense. And Hot Wheels a few years ago built a full-size Twin Mill, and it's pretty cool. To me, those were the cars that excited me as a kid. I liked those crazy things. If you look at my exhaust systems and the designs on most of my vehicles, they have stacks sticking out of the hoods. They definitely have a Hot Wheels vibe to them. I was talking to Tom Daniel about that the other day, and you see his design influences all through that, and it's not intentional. You know, it's like you could almost look at everything that I've put together and see something that is based off of one of his design cues, or you know, something that Ira Guilford did, or something like that, that you either saw on a Hot Wheels or a model or that kind of thing. Then Hot Wheels kind of went crazy, and the Matchbox did the same thing. Like I've got this one here, it's a toilet seat. You know, it's a commode with a motor on it, you know. And I've got it because obviously I thought it was funny. That's almost a rat rod type approach. It's almost a, let's see how crazy we can be, Monster Garage-y kind of thing. There's some fun in that, but that turns out to be kind of a big waste of money and time after you're done with it. If you can't enjoy it, if you can't drive it, you know, what are you gonna do with it? One of the most popular shows that we ever did was the V8 bar stool. I mean, people love that thing because it's a V8 bar stool. It's crazy, and it pops a wheelie, and that's it. But what you saw on the show is pretty much the use of the V8 bar stool. From then, people are like, oh, start it up. Okay, shut it off. I mean, it would go 10 miles an hour. It just, you couldn't drive it. You were deaf, you know. So I ended up trading it. It was a toy that you couldn't even really use. So a lot of these, like the toilet seat car and that kind of thing, there's a real fine line there where people like to see it and then they walk over and look at the real stuff. A prime example of that, and I hate to use this, but I actually saw this with my own two eyes. A few years back, we went up to cover the Detroit Autorama, where they have the Riddler Award. Now, for those of you that don't know, the Riddler Award is like the creme de la creme of car builders, car designers. Virtually all the cars that go into that are over $1 million. They're hand-built in every way, shape, form. The best builders out there. And if you can make it into the top 8, you know, it's a huge honor. Well, all of those cars are sitting there as you first walk into Copo Hall. And I thought, oh, this is going to be great. They're going to open the doors and people are going to swarm these cars. The best of the best. It was really interesting. We had the camera set up and it was a high shot, so I was kind of watching down below. And people walked in and it was almost like they were walking past a scene of a crime. They kind of skirted it. They made a loop around it and kind of looked at it from a distance. And then they all headed off to the basement where the rat rods were, or the Mopar area, or the muscle car area. It was the craziest thing I've ever seen. Very, very few people sat and looked at them. It is possible to build something that goes so far beyond what people can comprehend that they don't like it. You know, and it becomes almost like, well, look what I can do, and you suck. And no designer wants that. No builder wants that attitude, but sometimes it's kind of like, why? Why did you do that to that car? Especially if you're cutting up something that already was nice or already has a following. It's like taking a 68 Dodge Charger and chopping the top and butchering it up and sectioning it and quartering and everything like that. I mean, I think the Dodge Charger is one of the greatest automotive designs ever. So if you're going to modify that thing, boy, you better make sense. Okay, you know, a question that I get asked all the time, and it's actually not just a question that comes to me, but it's a conversation that happens at all of the car shows anytime car people get together. And it's, how do we make sure that the younger generation and people coming up, male and female, are getting into the car world? It's not just a car hobby, it's a car world, it's a lifestyle. Car popularity has to do directly with what's going on in culture. You know, through the 60s, when you look at when the first muscle car thing happened, and even back in the 50s when the hot rod thing started, well, a car was a major focus of culture. And as long as we keep it a center point of culture, you know, people will be growing up and they'll be into cars. One of the things that people are like, they're like, well, how do we make sure it stays part of culture? Well, you make sure that your kids, your nieces, your aunts, your uncles, your friends are involved in cars in every kind of way. And one of the best ways is with these little die-cast cars that we call Hot Wheels. Now, of course, Hot Wheels are different now than they were growing up. I would love to hear some of everybody's Hot Wheels stories. I've got a bunch. I'm sitting here with a bunch of Hot Wheels in front of me right now. I can't tell you how big of an influence that Hot Wheels were on me. And die-casts in general, you know, matchboxes, you know, that's where you got your bulldozers and your dump trucks, but your Hot Wheels were your hot rods and your race cars and your street machines. And man, we had Hot Wheels races in the neighborhood. But even though people don't do that now, you know, if you give a little car to a little boy or girl and you let them roll that thing around and let their imagination take over, you're going to have a car person there. And it's the same way with model kits. A model kit went so far to teaching me how a car is constructed. You know, the old Revell models, the old Monogram models, it showed you how to put a suspension together. Even though you didn't really understand all of the science behind it, you were putting the pieces together. So you know where leaf springs went, and you knew what spindles were, and you knew what brakes were, and a master cylinder, and those kind of things. And it's a direct learning ground for when you start putting something like that together in real life. You don't realize how big of an influence that this can be on you. For example, one of the first Hot Wheels that I got was the Hot Wheels Sky Show. And I don't even want to know how expensive these things are now if you had them all original, but basically it was a piece of track that came in a box, and you got one car, and it was either the custom fleet side or it was the Dioria, and it had a little ramp on it, and you got 3 little airplanes that you put on that ramp and you pulled them back with a rubber band and they launched back, and there was this arm that went down the side. And when you launched the car down the track, it went down, and when it hit that special piece of track, it would launch that airplane across the room, the little glider. And of course they didn't fly worth a hoot. And they were kind of a plastic thing. So the first thing you did was destroy the airplanes because they were kind of dumb. Anyway, so I loved the Sky Show, and I got one of those, and this was probably 1970, 71-ish. And the car that came with it was a custom fleet side, and it had the ramp on it. And so for a long time, through all of my Hot Wheels racing and stuff, I kept my custom fleet side because, you know, the airplanes were gone and the set was no longer, but it had that big stupid ramp on it. And then in my, you know, later years, 2 or 3 years later, I decided I didn't want that ramp on there, so I ripped the ramp off of it. So I've got a little pickup. Well, I found out later that if you have one with the ramp on it, they're like worth 5 times if you're a collector. You know, who knew? Now, just a little bit of story behind the custom fleet side. This was a car that was based on Harry Bentley Bradley's El Camino that he drove every day as he worked at Hot Wheels. Now, as you guys probably know, he was one of the first designers at Hot Wheels. They looked at it in the parking lot when they were trying to decide what the Hot Wheels cars were going to be, and the owner was like, well, that like that car you're driving, Harry, that's the kind of car. So the custom fleet side became a kind of a version of that, and it's always had controversy behind it because it's not really an El Camino and it's not really a C10 pickup. It's kind of between the two, but it leans a little more toward a C10 pickup with like an El Camino roof on it. But they called it the custom fleet side, which makes it a little bit misleading because people think it's a fleet side pickup. But obviously, if you look at it, the cab it's El Camino 100%. So that's one of my first Hot Wheels. Mine just happened to be kind of a burnt orange color. Now, fast forward many years, I built a truck called Copperhead, which was a 67 C10 pickup, and it happened to be a copper color. Now, you can look at my custom fleet side that I've got here right now. If you were looking at this on camera, you would see it. And if you can't see the correlation between Copperhead and that, you're not looking very hard. That is not something I set out to build. I didn't sit down one day and go, I'm going to build a version of the custom fleet side. It didn't even occur to me. That was all subliminal. You know, I just liked that color. I just liked that stuff. Now, is it because of that car? Maybe. Can you prove it one way or the other? No. But when people ask me, where did the design for Copperhead come from? Well, you have to dig a little deeper than that. If you look at my influences, it's kind of like when I was playing guitar professionally, you know, people would come in and go, well, what, that riff that you just played, where did that come from? And you're like, I don't know. You have to look at my influences to find out where that came from. That's where every designer, every musician, you take your influences that you have and you make them yours and you make your own version of it. And that's what car people do. As you're looking at these young people that are growing up watching these Fast and Furious movies, which they've now done what? 9 of them, 8 of them, whatever. And if you're looking at that rolling your eyes going, those are stupid, they don't know what a real car show is, man. You need to be a little easier on them because that generation is going to grow up to be the next bunch of car guys and girls. And it's awesome because they're going to do with what they've got, what we did with what we had. Just because they're not doing a 67 Camaro doesn't mean it's not cool. Matter of fact, sometimes it's even cooler. It's even more innovative. And believe me, they would be doing a 67 Camaro if all you old guys didn't grab them and make them too expensive. Stop it. Drive them. Get them out there. So I encourage you guys, if you want to cultivate the car culture in a young boy or girl, get them some die-cast. Take them to a race. Get them out to an event. Let them show what kind of fun that an automobile can be. Not just in what you can do with it when it's done, but also getting out there and watching the creative process in the garage. To me, if you want to get people involved in the industry, you got to keep it out before them. You got to make it cool, and you have to make it accessible. And if that means some die-casts and some Hot Wheels, some matchboxes, get it to them and sit down and roll them on the carpet with them. You'll be surprised what kind of things will come up and what kind of conversations you'll have. Keep in mind, this podcast is made possible by our friends at LMC Truck and our friends at Cornwell Tools. All right, that wraps it up for us today. It is time for you to get out there, start working on something, build something with your own 2 hands, send in your questions, send in your pictures, let us know what you're working on. All right, we'll see you later.